Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Dennis Monokroussos and this is my first video for chessvideos.tv. I hope you enjoy it and I hope this will be a great experience for everyone involved. So what I'm going to show you today, what we're going to focus on are, well, is at least one game, maybe a second game depending on how quickly it goes. And what we're going to do is take a careful look at something that I think is really important, and it's focusing your attention on what to do when your opponent hasn't castled, and really developing an eye for the opponent's uncastled king. So what I'm going to look at is one of my games played back in 1999, and maybe also, as I said, depending on how the time goes, maybe an earlier game, actually a speed game, which both show, I think, the importance, practically speaking, of really keeping an eye out for the opponent's uncastled king. And what I mean is this: often, if the person is about to castle and it looks like a kind of normal position, it's not a gambit with lots of wide open lines like diagonals and files, we think, well, okay, I'll just get on with my development and just do what I'm going to do without really thinking too much about what my opponent is up to. But as we'll see, it often pays to really keep your eyes open for tactical possibilities when the opponent hasn't castled. So this first game, as I said, is from 1999. My opponent was a player named Eric Di Mazzana, and this was played in a Game 40 tournament back in Las Vegas. So he had white, and he opened the game with the move c4. I played c6, offering to go into a Slav, or a Caro-Kann, I suppose, too, if he plays e4, though it doesn't necessarily have to go in that direction. Okay, my opponent played knight f3, I played d5, and now he played b3. This is certainly not a bad move, but it's a little unusual. The main move that you would expect to see is d4, of course, heading into a Slav or a semi-Slav. But he played b3. Of course, he wants to fianchetto his bishop on c1, and he wants to do so without playing d4 because d4 would block this bishop's diagonal. Okay, so here I played knight to f6. He played g3. And here already I have an interesting decision to make, because I want to develop all of my pieces as harmoniously as possible. But how exactly am I going to do this? If I played, for example, e6, well, then I would block in my bishop on c8. So I didn't really like that idea. If I played knight b to d7, well, again, the same thing. My bishop on c8 is trapped inside the pawn. Well, not trapped inside the pawn chain, but it's trapped behind the knight. So I'm going to have to move the knight again, and it's not really clear where it's going to be very well placed in the near future. So that seemed unsatisfactory. I could play g6 and bishop to g7 and castle, and that would take care of my kingside development. It would also perhaps neutralize his bishop from c1 when it gets to b2, and it's on the long diagonal as well. So these two bishops would kind of neutralize each other, and I would still keep the main diagonal open for my bishop on c8. So that's a reasonable plan, but what I didn't really like about this idea is, well, twofold. So one is that it really doesn't clamp on his bishop. So my knight on f6 is in the way of my bishop, whereas his bishop on b2 will probably be unopposed, or at least it won't be blocked by his own pieces. So he'll probably continue with d3 and knight to d2. So his bishop on b2 will have a clear diagonal. He'll have very nice control over the e5 square with his knight as well. And if I want to fully neutralize his bishop, I'm going to have to move my knight from f6 and swap the bishops off. And that really isn't very appealing to me. I don't want to have these dark square weaknesses around my king. So knight b to d7 didn't really excite me, e6 didn't excite me, and g6 didn't excite me. So what's left? Well, bringing the bishop from c8 out straight away is what's left. So there's bishop to f5. This would be a possibility. And I think this is okay. I don't think there's anything really wrong with this, but I came up with a different move, which I think is perfectly good, though it looks kind of provocative. And it's bishop to g4. Now, the reason why this is a little bit suspicious looking is that white can simply play the move knight to e5, and it looks as if he's gaining a tempo for free. I mean, just for absolutely nothing at all. My bishop's going to have to move, since I don't want to give him the bishop pair, and Meanwhile, his knight is on this beautiful square on e5, and it's not really clear what I've gained out of this. So my bishop's not badly placed on h5, but his knight seems to be really excellent on e5. Why would I do this? Well, here's my thought. So the thought that I had, I suppose there were two main ideas, but the key one with respect to the knight on e5 is that I felt, well, I can just play knight b to d7, and then what's he going to do with his knight? I mean, it's not going to be backed up with another knight, so his knight can't get from b1 to d2 to f3 fast enough to maintain this outpost on e5. If he trades on d7, so after I play knight b to d7, if he chops my knight off on d7, and I play queen takes, well, I ended up gaining time out of that because he'll have moved his knight 3 times to trade it off for a piece that moved just once. So that's completely satisfactory for me. And likewise, if he plays d4 or bishop to b2, or as we'll see in the game, bishop to f4 to support the knight, well, that's not really as exciting for him. Having a pawn on e5 or the bishop on e5 isn't really as good. Okay, so that was my main thought. The second thought is that even if this knight on e5 gives him a little something, which it won't, but even if it did, my bishop on h5 is actually quite well placed now, because when he plays bishop to g2 and castles, he's going to have a little bit of a problem with this e2 pawn. So it's not that I'm going to win it or anything like that, but it ties him down a bit. So he can't move his queen easily without losing the pawn. He could play d3 and queen c2, I suppose, but still, there's a little pressure on this pawn, which is annoying. It ties him down slightly, and he probably doesn't want to play e3, because that'll weaken some light squares on the king side. So I think my bishop is well placed. His knight is very well placed on e5, but it's only temporary, and so I thought this was okay. And of course, it lets me develop the rest of my pieces without any of them tripping on each other. All right, well, here I think bishop to b2 would have been his most natural move, and probably his best move. But he played d4. And already here, I started to feel as if something was maybe a bit wrong with this position. I mean, he's put this knight on e5, but other than that, he hasn't developed anything at all. e4 could be a good square for my knight at some point, so this looks promising. And additionally, maybe with e6, my bishop can come to b4, the queen might come to a5, and you can see that my pieces, while of course this takes me some time, they have the prospect of really starting to jump on him, especially on these dark squares like c3 and d2, before he completes his development. So I was starting to feel a little bit interested in what was going on. That the opening would be more than just bringing out pieces to routine squares, but that there might be some way to cause him some real trouble. Okay, so at this point I could have played e6. I think e6 would have been a perfectly good move to play. But I played knight b to d7 instead, so I wanted to challenge his knight right away. And now he played bishop to f4. All right, well, I don't want to capture on e5 just yet, but I will at some appropriate moment. So first I played e6. So I'm simply completing, well, I'm preparing to complete my development, and my opponent too played to complete his development with bishop to g2. So he's almost ready to castle. But again, I mean, I noticed that a lot of his pieces are just kind of funnily placed. They really are not as harmonious as they ought to be. So I already started looking, it was like bishop to b4 check. And I thought, okay, if I play bishop to b4 check here, he'll play knight to d2. If I play knight to e4, he'll probably take on e4. And even though I get rid of his good bishop, I felt a little unhappy about it. Also, just knight e4, he can simply play knight takes d7. I think this is even better. Just knight takes d7, queen takes d7. And actually, I can't castle, or he can't castle here because of knight to c3. So if he were to castle, knight c3, and he's losing the e2 pawn. This is just going to be disastrous for him. But maybe he simply takes on e4. I mean, this is still a bit fishy. I recapture, and now well, he can't play e3 because he loses the queen. Maybe he has to play bishop to e3. Maybe this is, well, no, a3, bishop to c3. So yeah, he's already in big trouble here. So bishop to e3, bishop c3, and this is at least very, very awkward for him. Rook to c1, bishop takes d4, knight takes e4, and this is actually a little bit unclear because if bishop takes e3, well, knight to d6 check isn't good because of king to e7, but it's still kind of a funny position. So I think I'm better here for sure. I mean, his pawn structure is terrible, but at least it's on the e file, which is closed. Maybe it's not as horrible as it could be for him. All right, so this looks like a promising continuation, certainly. Bishop to b4 check, knight to d2, knight e4, and whatever he does here, it's going to be not fully pleasing. So I'm threatening bishop to c3 as well. In fact, I can probably just play this right away. So White's position's not very good here. Maybe he has to just apologize and play bishop to d2. Probably that's right. He has to simply retreat. So I think that may have been why I chose to play knight takes e5 right away. That was probably my motivation. Because d takes e5 would be a small concession for his pawn structure. I could play knight to d7, or I'd probably play bishop to b4 check first, then either knight to e4 or knight to d7. And I mean, his position is still kind of clumsy looking. His bishop on f4 is in danger of becoming a glorified pawn because it's blocked in by the pawn on e5. So this is unattractive for him, and naturally he played bishop takes e5. But now this takes away the possibility that we saw here after bishop to g2. So if I checked right away, bishop to d2 probably saves his bacon. But now, after bishop takes e5, he no longer has this opportunity. So I played bishop to b4 check, and already things are getting quite serious here for him. He could play king to f1, but no one wants to make a move like that. Then he can't castle, and his rook is going to be locked in on h1, and he's just quite uncoordinated. So he tried to tough it out and play knight to d2. Now I don't have bishop to c3 here because the bishop on e5 protects the d pawn, but I can play d takes c4. All right, and after b takes c4 here, I probably can play bishop to c3. Now the drawback of this, though, is that he may be able to still fight with rook to b1, and if bishop takes on d4, he can take, and then play rook takes b7. And he's unfortunately threatening to play bishop takes c6 check here, and also if I don't have anything special, he'll simply castle. So rook to d8 might be playable. It looks pretty speculative, but maybe Black can get away with that. So bishop takes c6, king to f8, and it's uncomfortable, but maybe White can play queen to c1 here. And he's going to follow up by moving this knight from d2, maybe to b3, and then hopefully castle. Well, hopefully from his point of view, not from mine, but maybe he can get away with that. So it's a race, but maybe he's in time to survive. Might be able to try knight to g4, maybe knight to e4, protecting the f2 pawn. Let's see, f5. Well, f5 is kind of scary looking. Let's play bishop to g6 instead there. Threatening bishop takes e4, followed by queen takes f2 mate. And yeah, I wouldn't give very much money, or I wouldn't take very much money to take White's position. This is pretty awful looking. So I think this is promising as well. Yeah, I don't see any great ideas for White, excuse me. Certainly for Black, there's no shortage of great ideas. I mean, might be able to try something like this, and then queen to f4, trying for a little counterplay. So we're hitting this, and we're hitting f7. But bishop to f5 seems to hold everything. e4, maybe this could work. So a very complicated variation here, but maybe by some miracle, White can escape. Could try g5, queen takes, knight e5. So now we're threatening to play knight f3, and we're threatening knight takes c6. So maybe Black is winning. So it's very, very complicated. Certainly White is just holding on by a thread, if at all. So this looks promising, but it is quite complex. So I found a much simpler solution, I think. So in this position, another idea I have actually that I didn't play, but something else that I considered quite seriously, was the move queen to a5. Again, just trying to tie him down as much as possible. And if bishop to f4, perhaps I can castle long or play rook to d8, hitting the d pawn, and just threatening to pile up until black has to give. I keep saying black, until white has to give. Sorry. Yeah, I don't think there's any good solution to this either. If castles, for example, rook takes d4, and there's no counterattacking trick like knight to b3 because black takes, and then he takes the rook, and then next move he, meaning I, would capture the knight on a5 and enjoy life with an extra piece and pawn. Notice again the virtue of this bishop on h5. It prevents any kind of e3 defense, although e3 fails in a second way because it allows bishop takes d2. So this is really a miserable position for white, just all the way around here. And it's not clear exactly how he's going to survive this. Perhaps the best defensive approach is to simply play queen to c2. And then follow up with rook to d1. So that probably holds everything together, at least for a little while, and might be the best way for white to defend. Okay, so instead, after b takes c4, after that pawn exchange, my next move was knight to g4. Alright, so notice that this prevents castling, and it actually has a lot of very nice tactical points. So if he castles, I simply take on e5, he recaptures, and then I have queen takes d2, free extra piece. Okay, what else can he try? If he plays rook to b1, which is in fact what he did play, this has another very nice tactical problem, which I demonstrate in the game. So here I played knight takes e5. Here he played d takes e5, but first let's consider briefly the move rook takes b4, because this looks, well, it doesn't look great, certainly, but it looks at first as if it might give white a little breathing room. So maybe black could just take on d4, but then white could castle and hopefully live to fight later on. Unfortunately, there's a pretty serious tactical problem with rook takes b4, and it's knight to d3 check. If he moves the king, I win the rook, and if he takes the knight, then he loses his queen. So once again, my bishop to g4, h5 idea is paying off really nicely. So if he doesn't want to be a piece down, and rook takes b4 doesn't help at all, he has to play the move d takes e5, which in fact he did play. Okay, so again, now he's threatening my bishop, and he's threatening the castle, and we certainly do not want to allow that. So I played the move queen to a5, tying down his knight and protecting my own bishop. So if he castles, I get a free piece. And meanwhile, it's not so clear what he does to defend. If he plays the obvious move rook to b2, well, then I just castle queenside, or I could play rook to d8, I suppose, but castling is much more efficient here. And there's no way for him to defend the knight anymore. So I've got, I'm just going to play rook takes d2, and then I'll bring in seconds with the other rook. So rook d2, rook d8. And I'm preventing castling as well. So white is just completely lost here. But he thought he saw another defensive approach instead of rook to b2. He played the move bishop to e4. And this looks quite logical. After castles, it would seem as if white could just play bishop to d3, blocking the d file, and again preparing, well, he still can't castle, but maybe he can creep out with f3, and then e4, and then king to e2, and finally knight to b3 and getting on with life. Unfortunately, if he plays bishop to d3, again, I just exploit this. I mean, we have pin heaven here. So rook takes d3, and I mean, it's just horrible for white. It's a complete nightmare. You can't take the rook because queen is hanging. And meanwhile, he's pinned on the d file, he's pinned on the a5 e1 diagonal, and he's pinned on the h5 d1 diagonal. So this is an absolute nightmare for white. And he's a piece down to boot. So in this position, instead of bishop to d3, he played rook to b2. But now, as mentioned before, I simply played rook takes d2, rook takes d2, and rook to d8. With, again, the exact same point that if you were to play bishop to d3 now, once again, I have rook takes d3. So just an absolutely horrifying position for white to deal with. So in this position, he finally decided enough with these pins. It was unbearable, and he just castled away, gave me the piece, and really there's nothing to play for here. I think we made 3 more moves, and then he resigned. So he played queen to b3. I played rook takes e2. Why not take more stuff, right? So he plays queen to d3, protecting the bishop. I played bishop to c5, putting some further pressure on the f2 pawn. And after rook to d2, I played rook to e1 check, forcing further trades, and in fact just winning more material, because after rook to e1, he has to take on e1 because my bishop is also hitting his rook. So takes, queen takes, king to g2, and now maybe there's even better, but just queen takes f2, and he's got to play king h3 to avoid the mate, and it's just obviously a catastrophically bad position. So I'm up a piece and 2 pawns. His king is in a bit of trouble, and he has no counterplay whatsoever. So it was a very, very enjoyable game. I think many of you will probably recognize the similarities to the very famous game between Morphy and the Count and Duke, the old opera game, as it's sometimes called, in the Philidor defense. For those of you who aren't familiar with it, I heartily recommend that you look it up. It's a beautiful prototype of, an absolute pin massacre. So this game was quite similar in some ways. But the key thing, again, was that I really had a sense in this position, or starting around here, and for sure here, that his king had just been in the center a little too long, and he had some real weaknesses. So it just felt like there had to be something here, and it was a matter of just taking a little extra time and looking for it. I mean, I have, again, some really powerful pieces, and pieces that find their way to some great squares, while he's not really properly coordinated. So it gave me the impetus to really look to see what I could find there. And sure enough, there was something to be found, and it made for a very nice, quick, and easy win against a very good player. So my opponent was, I think 2238 was his rating at the time. Certainly a respectable player, but if you take liberties in the opening, it doesn't matter how strong you are, something bad can happen. Okay, so let me quickly show another game of mine that I think you'll find entertaining. And again, one that highlights really keeping a sharp eye out for trying to exploit the opponent's king remaining in the center a bit too long. Okay, so this time I'm white, and my opponent was a friend of mine who was an expert, just a blitz game, but still I think a game that's quite attractive and instructive as well. Alright, so I had white and I played e4, c5, and because it was blitz I played d4, the Smith-Morra Gambit. I wouldn't say I recommend it, but I used to play it quite regularly, and generally with pretty good success. Okay, c takes d4, c3, and my brave opponent accepted the gambit. Perhaps it's the right way to play, though I think the more practical approach is to just decline with knight to f6. Okay, so a6, knight f3. Don't really want to discuss the theory of any of this. I played bishop to c4. Maybe bishop to f4 is more accurate, but again, not really too worried about the theory. Just want to get to the interesting point. Okay, castles. And I'm, of course, playing rather provocatively because now he can play b4, and if I move my knight someplace boring and ordinary, he simply captures on e4 with the bishop, and then he's got 2 extra guys. Now, of course, I have trumps in the position too, the main one being a pretty big lead in development. I mean, his king is far from castling, and So that means that if the position opens up, he'll at least have a pretty tough defensive task, certainly in the context of a blitz game. All right, so here I played knight to d5, so I'm not going to play something wimpy like knight to a4 and give him the second pawn. You don't play the Smith Moore because you're overly concerned about pawns. All right, so the knight's beautiful on d5. I mean, if he doesn't take my knight, it's simply a very, very nicely posted piece. So he rips it off, and now I play e takes d5. Okay, well, of course I'm a piece down, but the e-file is opened, so that's going to be useful. I have the positional threat of playing d6, which will really cause him some anguish in his development. Additionally, it'll reopen the beautiful diagonal for my bishop on b3. So here, I think he has a choice between two moves. There's bishop to d6, which is okay, and there's d6, which is the most natural move and what he in fact played. All right. Well, now here, I think white has a couple of good moves. One approach is just a quite simple one. Knight to d4, and after bishop to e7, bishop to a4 check. And, okay, this forces black to play king f8, because if knight to d7, then I think white gets a really big initiative. So king to f8 is a little clumsy for black, but his king is relatively safe there. I'll have some counterplay to be sure, but black should be okay. Probably, objectively speaking, I don't think I have enough compensation for the piece there. All right, but here I thought for probably a minute and a half or 2 minutes, and again, just this fundamental question that I have to address. How do I keep his king in the center of the board? All right, so I could do what I just said, but I probably didn't take that line seriously enough, and I think I expected at the time that after bishop to a4, he'd probably play knight to d7. All right. Now, in retrospect, with the benefit of much analysis, I think white is doing okay there. But at the time, I thought that's probably a dead end. Really, what I have to do is prevent him from castling. And it doesn't seem very easy for me to do this. He's simply going to play bishop to e7 or knight to f6 in one order or another, and castle. And how do I stop this? So I really feel pretty happy about the solution that I came up with here. So what I played was this. So I played first queen to d4. All right, well, that stops bishop to e7, of course, because I'll play queen takes g7. But it may not be clear at first what exactly this does after the move knight to f6. All right, so black is still going to play bishop to e7, isn't he? What's my big compensatory idea here? How do I keep him stuck in the center? All right, well, the solution I found, and again, one I'm very happy with, is bishop to h6. All right, now this looks crazy at first, but as we explore this, we'll see that it's actually really a pretty logical idea. All right, so first of all, the simplest point is that it stops bishop to e7 pretty directly because I have bishop takes g7. Okay, so that's first of all. Second point is that if he takes, which in fact is what he did do, now I have rook f to e1 check. And if he plays bishop to e7, so here's the punchline. Well, actually, that's what he does do. So, but the basic idea is that now I have queen takes f6. All right, so if he castles, then I play rook takes e7, and I've gained all of my material back, and material is even, but his king position is quite poor, and I have a lot more space, and my pawn structure is better. I mean, everything is in my favor here. So castling has been prevented, and he's stuck. All right, now what if he played something else here? So let's suppose he plays king to d7. After all, now he's going to be 2 pieces up after king to d7. Unfortunately, he'll be 2 pieces up, but he won't have the happiest king in the world, because now I play bishop to a4 check, and if he plays knight to c6, I of course just take, so we can see that this is not a very happy idea. Takes, and now I can exploit more pins with knight to e5 check, and then I win the second piece back as well, and this is terrible for him. So after bishop to a4 check, say king to c7, rook a to c1 check, and again, this is not good news for him. Knight to c6, bishop takes, rook takes, king to b7, queen takes b4, king to a7. And now probably the simplest solution here, which you should try to find yourself before I say it, is rook to e3. With the point that I'm threatening now, rook takes a6, king takes a6, rook to a3 check with mate next move. All right, I didn't see all of that, of course, but I did see bishop a4 check and king c7, rook c1, and that I was winning my piece back with a big attack. So it looks as if he's really just in trouble after bishop to h6. So a really nice idea. Okay, so as I said, in the game he played g takes h6, rook check, bishop e7, queen takes f6, and here he chose to play rook to g8. All right, unfortunately this is just a kind of a capitulation move. I played rook takes e7, queen takes e7, rook to e1, and I'm simply, well, I guess material is technically still about even, but his king is still in trouble, and he's undeveloped. So queen takes, knight takes, played rook to g6 to x-ray defend the pawn on d6, but after bishop to a4 check, he's just in desperate trouble. If he plays king to f8 here, I play queen to d8, king to g7, and now bishop to b3, protecting the d5 pawn, and I'm going to follow up with queen to b6, and this queenside jumble of his is just a mess. He can't get himself untangled here. And that, of course, would happen on knight c6 as well, so that would just lose a piece for him. Okay, so after bishop to a4 check, instead he played knight to d7, but now I just win quite simply. I take, he takes, queen f7 check. He's got to play king to c8 to save his bishop, and then I played queen takes h7, and here he resigned, since he can't play rook to f6, because I have queen to a8 check, h8 check, forking the king and the rook, and otherwise the rook has to abandon the h6 pawn, and then I've got 3 connected passed pawns on the king side. So should be a routine win from here. So again, I think a very interesting and enterprising game, and the key idea again was just the think that I had here. So it's taking a couple of minutes, even in a 5-minute game, trying to figure out how do I keep the king in the center. So what I hope this lesson or these 2 games will at least give you a little bit of help for, and a little bit of an instinct for, is to have a sense that when the king is stuck in the center, when the opponent's king is stuck in the center, to really take that extra little bit of thought to see if there's some way you can exploit it. Often there won't be any way, but sometimes there will be, and more often perhaps than you might realize. So, try to cultivate an instinct, a little bloodlust for the enemy king before it castles. So thanks again. I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope that this will be the first of many more lectures to come. So thank you very much, and I'll see you next time. Goodbye.